How long has Germany been united? Barely anything in the historical perspective. So why don't they return to their natural roots? Especially considering that some of these states were invented by the Russian Empire, and they gained their statehood only thanks to the Russian czars. So back to the tribes, you barbarians.
So new sanctions hit Russia again. And guess what? Moscow is still bragging about its invisible weapons, Putin is still celebrating imaginary victories, and state TV is still crying that the West wants to destroy Russia. Same script, different week. I'm Sofia, and this is Spin Snipers, where we turn Kremlin drama into bite-sized reality checks. US sanctions against Russia have been in place for just a week, and in a classic Kremlin fashion, propagandists have already found someone to blame. Criticizing President Donald Trump directly is still off limits. Putin is still dreaming of another handshake moment. So instead, they go after his team. The new enemy of Russia is US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Moscow noticed he supports sanctions and that he's openly gay. For Kremlin TV, that's enough to turn economic policy into moral panic. Because when propaganda runs out of logic, it switches to homophobia.
So, they hate us on a completely different basis. On a deep level. That's where this hatred comes from. And yet, look at what we see. On one hand, there's Donald Trump, who talks about some traditional values, men, women. Meanwhile, the person handling policies against Russia and suppressing Russia is, to put it politely, someone who could be considered religious in a delusional way, and certainly not a supporter of traditional values. And of course, because of this, he harbors absolute and irreconcilable hatred toward our country.
Traditional values. Yeah, you probably heard that one on Russian TV. Putin started hyping it up after his so-called second coming, that his third term in 2012, if you're counting. Since then, Russia has been claiming the title of a moral center of the universe. And in 2022, right after kicking off a full-scale war against Ukraine, this traditional Russian spiritual and moral values officially became state ideology. Because obviously, invading your neighbor, killing civilians and children is totally moral. But back to the sanctions, they rattled the Kremlin so much that even Putin himself had to come out with a statement.
Of course, this is an attempt to put pressure on Russia. But no self-respecting country and no self-respecting people ever make decisions under pressure. And without a doubt, Russia has the privilege of feeling and considering itself among those self-respecting countries and peoples.
Russian propagandists are whispering to Trump, Moscow won't budge, not even under sanctions. So all these friendly statements about wanting dialogue? Yeah, just hot air. Russia apparently has no intention of changing its position, sanctions or not.
Trump still hasn't understood, as Orban believes, that imposing sanctions on our country was pointless. He has absolutely no idea how to deal with Moscow. He resorts to threats and moralizing. He can't even control his pathetic lapdogs. Because, of course, when this cheap Besson starts barking, it just looks utterly inappropriate.
With sanctions, hating Putin had to show some success. He bragged to the occupiers about testing their nuclear-powered underwater Poseidon, supposedly unmatched in the world, impossibly to intercept, totally scary. The day before, dressed in a military uniform, he waved around the new Burevestnik missile. 2 days in a row. Message clear. Sanctions? Pfft, Russia is not scared.
It is a small nuclear propulsion unit. With comparable power to a nuclear reactor on a nuclear submarine, it is 1,000 times smaller than the nuclear reactor on a submarine. But the most important thing is not even that. The key point is that while conventional nuclear reactors take hours, days, or even weeks to start up, this nuclear reactor can be activated within minutes or even seconds.
It's the same old tactic when the economy tanks, just flash some nuclear toys on TV. Ukraine's Center for Countering Disinformation confirms it. Putin's talks about Poseidon and Burevestic is pure psychological pressure on the West. These threats are not about strength, they're about fear. The Kremlin is reacting to growing isolation, economic pain, and the creeping realization that its own aggression is coming back to bite.
Putin's scare tactics about invincible weapons are an attempt at psychological pressure on the West. Moscow is trying to intimidate Ukraine's allies, including the US, slow down military aid, and force the world to accept war-ending conditions favorable to Russia. Sanctions have pressed Putin so hard that he's started bringing up all Soviet and Russian missiles, trying to scare the world with nuclear weapons that Russia still won't be able to use.
But Putin didn't stop at showing off weapons. He also bragged about victories on the battlefield. Oops, and here we go again, another lie. He claimed Ukrainian forces were blocked and surrendered near Pokrovsk and Kupiansk, and even offered a ceasefire for journalists to visit. Yes, the situation at the front is tough. Fast battles continue as Russian troops try to hold their positions. But what Putin says, pure fiction, just another way to justify an unprovoked war to his own people. Here is what Ukraine's joint forces actually report.
Any claims about Ukrainian troops being encircled are fabrications and fantasies that have no basis in factual evidence on the ground. If the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin were not a war criminal, one could express sympathy that in his old age he is once again forced to make a fool of himself and repeat the lies of his own generals. Lies that even his loyal audience and the Russian elite cannot possibly believe.
And if Putin's words still sound convincing, here is some proof from the ground. According to Deep State, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed the Russian tricolor that occupiers had planted at the entrance to Pokrovsk. They spotted the flag around 9:40 a.m. on October 29th, and by 10:40 it was gone. That's right, the battles are still fierce, and Russian troops, they don't actually control anything there. Putin even claimed he was ready to a ceasefire in those areas just so the media could visit. He also lied that Russia was worried Ukraine might stage provocations while journalists were there. Funny, right? Except it's not, because it's Russia that kills journalists. On October 23rd, a Russian Lancet drone strike near Kramatorsk killed journalist Olena Khramova from the Freedom TV channel and a cameraman Yevgen Karmazin. And yet, Russia keeps trying to sell the same old story, that Europe is one who wants war and Russia a peaceful DAO just defending itself. Now Kremlin propagandists even claim that the West wants to break up Russia into small states. Sounds familiar. Remember George Bush Sr., the US president who didn't want the Soviet Union to collapse because he feared chaos in a nuclear state? What's changed since then? Nothing. The West does not want Russia to fall apart. It just wants Russia to stop invading others.
Sergei Shoigu, Secretary of the Security Council, today again confirmed the information that they in fact have been openly shouting for a while. The so-called West's goal is to divide Russia into many small states, and this is not separatism. When Russians in Donetsk and Luhansk raised their voices to defend their faith and language, the West called it separatism.
So the West is calling for the dismemberment of Russia? Which West? Saxony, Prussia, Westphalia, Neapolitans. Who is demanding the division? Lombards. Who are you, proud warriors? Scots, who are you?
Actually, none of them are demanding it. The ordinary people aren't.
Meanwhile, Russian talking heads on state TV are going even further. Europe in its current form should not exist. Oh, and apparently some European countries were invented by the Russian Empire. You didn't know it? Me neither. Sounds just as crazy as the idea that Ukraine was invented by Lenin.
I don't consider Europe as it exists today to be a real entity. These are conditional states, barely a few years old. How old are all these countries? How long has Germany been united? Almost nothing in historical terms. So why don't they return to their natural roots? Especially considering that some of these states were invented by the Russian Empire. They gained their statehood only thanks to the Russian czars. So back to the tribes, you barbarians.
So why all the noise? Maybe to justify the 3-day war now dragging into a year 4, or just to scare the West, which is trying to provide security guarantees. Moscow screams, the Western troops in Ukraine done for. They promised to crush them in a day and a half. Sounds familiar, right? Meanwhile, the so-called second largest army in the world stuck. No way to win.
According to Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, the General Staff of the French Armed Forces is preparing to deploy a contingent of up to 2,000 soldiers and officers to Ukraine. Listen, that's good for a day and a half of war? We'll kill you all. Why are you getting involved? Why? I understand you'll most likely send riffraff from Latin America dressed up in Foreign Legion uniforms, so the coffins don't come to France. Well, in the end, we will come to Paris again.
Putin can bark, but facts don't lie. That's it for today. I'm Sofia, and this was Spin Snipers. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and don't fall for the spin.